Okay, that'll come into play later. Hey, 8:30 service was rough. It was almost like we had worship at 7:30 this morning. I don't know why it felt like that, but it sure did. Emily said later, Tim, I think you fell asleep halfway through the sermon while you were preaching. It's good to know that I can do that. That's good. That's awesome. But we didn't have this cross set up at 8:30 yet because we were so behind because it was 7:30. And so they didn't get to experience what you guys get to experience this morning. We are going to randomly select 2 or 3 people to come up and be tied to this cross as I preach, to symbolize the suffering of Jesus. Any volunteers? I'm just kidding. We would never do that. I don't think. Would we? No, we never do that. Oh, wow. At the cross. At the cross. That's what our faith is all about. This is a great series, I think it's going to be, at the cross. Jesus says 7 things, 7 statements on the cross. 7 things. Theologians, people that stay up really late and they have big bags under their eyes and they study this stuff, they say that these 7 things pretty much covers the faith. If you understand the 7 statements, Jesus said everything you need to know while he was on the cross. But I think, I've always heard that the first thing is the most important. You got to make a grand entrance. The first thing you say captivates attention, bores people, puts people to sleep, whatever it is. And so I'll give you, for those of you who were here the first time that I preached here, which seems like that was years ago, but it actually was only like 5 months ago. The first time I preached, I started with this, just to show you how this works. I started with this. I was like, so, this is my wife, Emily. Some of y'all are probably looking at her and thinking, how did a guy like this get a lady like this? And so I was thinking the same thing. And so I asked her, when you were dating me, what was it about me that you liked? And she said, well, Tim, it was 2 things. Number 1, you were funny. Number 2, you made me think you were smart. Hey, see how that works though? That works, yeah. And so there's some other ones because I dabble in speaking, and so I try to study this stuff. That was my own. But these are some that you find online. I love this. This is great. It says, thank you for the warm welcome. My wife said to me before I left, don't try to be too charming, witty, or intellectual. Just be yourself. That sounds like something you would say too. That probably is like there. Okay, here's a good one. As I walked up here, I realized we all have one thing in common today. We have no idea what I'm about to say. That's more true than you know. Some of y'all that have heard about the 8:30 service before, you're like sitting here like, oh, and you're like, well, that's not what, anyway. Okay. Oh, wow. I don't know about this one. Asking me to speak is like watching a dog walk on its hind legs. Even if it's not perfect, you're still amazed it can be done at all. Self-depreciating humor is the name of the game. Another good one. I used to think I was indecisive. Now I'm not so sure. This applies to the 8:30 service. Like I really need to say to them this opening every single week at 8:30. It says, if you can hear me in the back, please let the people in the front know because they look confused already. That's just, that's that. And then finally, this was the point of the grand opening this morning. And this is true. I'm not an expert in everything I'm about to say, but I'm very enthusiastic, and I find that's often enough. That's the key to my success right there. I figured that out at an early age. I shouldn't tell y'all that, but yeah, just look enthusiastic. Look like you know what you're talking about. And that's good. Half the battle, G.I. Joe says. 7. We have a Sunday school class here that is studying the book of Revelation. Bless their hearts. And you hear the number 7 a lot. We got 7 churches, 7 trumpets, 7 seals, 7 bowls, 7 thunders. 7 is the number of totality. It's the number of completion. It's the number of perfection. You know, when you hear 7 in the Bible, you know that you've got it all. It's the God number. It means perfection. And so I don't think it was an accident that Jesus made these 7 statements from the cross. Jesus wants us to know that these are the 7 things that you need to remember. I don't know if any of you have been in the position with your loved ones where the person knew that they were going to pass away. It wasn't a sudden thing. And what they tell you at those last moments could be the most important things of all. This is what I want you to know. And so Jesus is hanging on the cross, and this is what he wants us to know. And the first one is really surprising, because the first one is forgiveness. It starts with forgiveness. And that doesn't make sense to so many people. The thing about these 7 statements of Jesus is it's very easy to take them out of context. And as I've told you before, context is everything. And so with the first statement, more than any of the others, I want to put it in context. Crucifixion was a barbaric thing. It was so barbaric that they wouldn't crucify Roman citizens no matter how bad they were, because it was that bad. They used it more as a political statement than actual punishment. It was a sign to people not to oppose Rome and Roman authority. They would do it in populated areas. You wouldn't see this out by itself because they wanted people to see it. You could be on a road from Capernaum, say, to another town, and you would pass by with your family, and you would see 6, 8 crosses, one after another, with criminals hanging on them. And the kids would look up and think horrible things, and the parents would say, look away. And they would leave the people up there. Even after they were gone, they would just leave the bodies hanging because it was a symbol, don't mess with Roman authority. This is what happens if you oppose Rome. They decided very early in Jesus' ministry that they were going to kill him. It was just finding the right time, finding the right excuse to do it. But he had a habit of making people mad. And when you tell the truth, you usually end up making people mad. And so they finally found their opportunity. They got Judas. They had him arrested, taken into custody. They bounced him back and forth like a ping pong ball. Nobody wanted to take responsibility for it. What do we do? They had this kangaroo court form trial. Everything was a sham. And finally, they sent him away. And the first thing he does is he gets beaten. And many of us watched The Passion of the Christ, right? And we thought to ourselves, Mel Gibson, why is he doing this? Why is he showing us this? Why is he's wanting more attention on this movie? Why I'm trying to take my family to the theater and watch this, and I see all this blood and it's gruesome and I have to look away. Mel Gibson just wants attention. Mel Gibson just trying to make a spectacle out of this. But you know what? Some of the scholars say that Mel Gibson didn't go far enough of what it was really like. He held back. The cat of 9 tails, the Roman flagrum that they used, was not to be messed with. It wasn't a whip. It had different tails, as the name says, and on the end of those tails they would tie pieces of glass and metal and sharp objects. So it wouldn't whip the person. It would hit, the ends of them would hit one side of the person's back, and when they pulled the whip back, it would tear across the area, tearing the skin, disconnecting tissue from bone. And as horrible as it sounds, you ever wonder why it's 39 lashes? I mean, that's a weird number to end on. I'm going to give you 39 lashes. Well, believe it or not, they did this so many times, they figured out that usually it was around the 40th lash that someone would just die. And they didn't want them to die, but they wanted to get them as close as possible, and so they stopped at 39. So So 39 times Jesus was whipped on both sides, everywhere. By the time that was over, there wasn't much skin probably left. And then they would punch him. They would say, okay, you're a prophet. Which one of us punched you? They would tear his beard off of his face, and then they took that crown of thorns, and we like to just look at it like it's like a king where they just put it on his head, but no, they dug that into his head where all the thorns were inside of it. He was in hypovolemic, I'm probably saying that wrong, shock because of a loss of blood at that point. And it was at that point that they said, okay, we're going to take the crossbeam and you're going to carry it up this hill. Obviously, that was never going to happen, right? So they found a bystander, say, you're going to have to do this for him. He doesn't even have skin on his back. He can't carry this. And so Simon of Cyrene carried the cross up, and he got there, and they nail him to the cross. These things that they used were like what we would refer to in today's world as like railroad spikes. And they didn't put them right here, we don't think. Scholars think that this is how medieval painters would paint it, like this. But really, it was right here in the middle of the wrist between, I can't remember the names, but between a couple ligaments, nerves. They knew just where to do it, where the body wouldn't tear down. And then they would take the legs and they would put them on top of each other, and they would put a railroad spike through the legs. And then that's where they dropped the body, if you can imagine, into place. I mean, can you imagine that? And from that point on, anybody who got crucified would wish they would just hurry up, because every breath, the person to breathe would have to push himself up to give him the support to breathe. And pushing up meant you had to move your feet who were nailed. It was an excruciating way to die. Tim, why in the world? We're not even close to Good Friday. Why are you describing this to us this morning? Because to understand the first statement Jesus makes from the cross, you have to understand the context. It is in that context that Jesus says, forgive. What would you have said? What would be your first statement from the cross? And that kind of pain, without having skin basically on your back anymore, with so much of a loss of blood and the pain everywhere, having to push up every single time you breathe. I know me, I would have been like, God, is there something you can give me? I know that I have to die for the sins of the world, but is there something you can give me to numb the pain? Can you do something? Can you take me out of my body at least and kind of just let me sit back from a distance while the body goes through this? Can you do something? God, where are my friends? Where did they go? They're not here anymore. I have a couple ladies here. There's John. Thank you, John. Is there anybody else? God, are you going to do something for me? Your son with you since eternity. We're one. We've been together, loved each other since eternity. I mean, what would you have said? What does Jesus say? The very first thing that Jesus says in that situation is, Father, forgive them. That's the beginning of the conversation. That's where it starts. That's where it starts. Before you even knew that you needed forgiveness, that's where it starts. When you were in the act of whatever you did that you still feel guilty of this day, while you were in the act, the Father was already saying, forgiveness, forgiveness, I forgive you. That's where it starts. And the reason it starts there is because we can't do it. We can't do it. There's nothing we can do to make that relationship with God right. He has to do it. He has to do everything. Yes, we confess. Yes, we repent. But it all starts because of God. It takes God saying, you are forgiven. That's where it starts. It's where it starts. We see this in the story of the prodigal son. I mentioned it in the David series because it tied to it, but we see it again here, so I have to point it out again. Where did forgiveness happen in that story? Where did it happen? The person comes to his senses. He's wasted all his money. He's lived the wrong kind of way and decides, I'm going to go back to the Father. I'm going to go back to God. I'm going to say I'm sorry. I'm going to confess what I've done. I'm going to say, look, I'll do penance. I'll go work. I'll go live in the servant's cabin for a while. You don't have to do anything. I hope to earn my way back into your good favor, Father. Anything I can do, I deserve what I'm giving. And so he goes home. And what does the Father do? The Father doesn't even wait for a word from the Son. The Father says, ho, ho, ho. And this is funny. This is funny. We don't even get the comedy behind this, but the Father would have picked up his robe, because that's what they wore back then, and would have run outside to the Son like this. And before the Son can even get a word out of his mouth, he's like, you're home! You're home! Kill the calf. Here's the ring. Here's the sandals. Form a party. My son is home. The Son can't even talk. Why? The very first thing from the Father is forgiveness. That's where it starts. Forgiveness. 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 Why was the first thing forgiveness? Why did Jesus say that? I don't know what you've done. You probably don't have me beat. But Jesus wants you to know. In that moment where his pain was the absolute worst, the first thing he said when it was hitting him the absolute worst, forgiven. Forgiven. Our creative writers can't even write a story like this. God loves you so much before you even say the word forgiven. Whatever you think you've done, some of us think that we have to ask for forgiveness so many times because we've done so many things. We come to the communion table and we say again, God, forgive us, forgive us, forgive us. We're thinking about those things. God says it's done. You're forgiven. You're forgiven. It's over. Whatever you've done, whatever I've done, the very first thing that God says to you this morning and what we celebrate at this table is the word forgiveness. Now, God doesn't leave it there. There's 6 more things. But that's where it starts. If you don't have a relationship with Jesus right now, that's where it starts. Forgiveness. It doesn't make any sense. No other religion is like this. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to give $100, or you don't have to. Forgiven. Forgiven. It's so ridiculous, it has to be true. Forgiven.